KLTV is your election news leader. It's one of the most closely watched races this Senate cycle, and one that could determine the balance of power in Washington.
Democratic Congressman Colin Allred and Republican Senator Ted Cruz are vying to represent Texas in the upper chamber. Both sat down with KLTV's Michael Richardson in Tyler to discuss their plans to improve the economy, reduce illegal immigration, and a whole lot more.
For one candidate, it's not their first rodeo. It's his third. For another, it's his first time in the statewide spotlight. Representative Colin Allred's appearance at the DNC underscored the national implications of this year's election for who will represent the Lone Star State in the U.S. Senate.
And this November, I'm going to beat Ted Cruz.
My record is one of delivering results for the people of Texas for 12 years consistently.
Both Allred and Senator Ted Cruz are trying to garner up as much support in East Texas as possible. That's why they campaigned in the Piney Woods region this week. The economy is at the forefront of many voters' minds heading into November. To fix it, Cruz imprints conservative beliefs. Less regulations means more jobs.
Jobs come from small businesses. Jobs come from entrepreneurs putting capital at risk to meet a need. But if you want to create an environment where jobs are plentiful, you want low taxes and you want low and reasonable regulations.
Allred's economic agenda? Raising teacher salaries, lowering the cost of child care, and increasing the number of houses available.
And what is that plan, if you don't mind me asking, regarding housing?
Well, to me, we're going to have to work out the details of it. But we know we have fundamentally a supply issue, which means that we need to build more housing. And the housing that we build has to be affordable and connected.
Many provisions of the Trump tax cuts are set to expire next year. The Congressional Budget Office estimates extending those cuts could increase the U.S. deficit by over $3 trillion over 10 years. Cruz wants to extend them.
Donald Trump has rightly said he would extend those tax cuts, and if we have majorities, I'm going to be fighting not just to extend them, but to make them bigger and bolder.
Allred says,
what I want to make sure is that we lower the tax burden on the middle class. To me, that's the heart of our economy in our country. It's also folks who are paying in so many ways into the system, and we have to make sure that that tax burden doesn't go up for them.
Immigration has consistently polled as a top issue for voters this election. Last December, there were roughly 250,000 encounters at the southern border, the highest ever recorded. It was noticed by both major parties. Earlier this year, a bipartisan group of senators introduced legislation that would have provided over $20 billion to try and curb illegal immigration. That includes over $500 million to hire more immigration personnel, $47.5 million for more mobile surveillance technologies, and policies to close the border if enough people cross in a day or 7-day average, 8,500 and 5,000 individuals respectively. Cruz voted against it. He explains why.
And that particular bill was a terrible bill. It was a partisan bill that Chuck Schumer was responsible for, and it would have made the problem worse.
In contrast, Allred supported the legislation. And unlike Cruz, he does not support a wall along the entire southern border.
I've never supported the idea that we should have a wall from sea to shining sea. That doesn't make any sense. But there are areas, particularly high-trafficked areas, and that's where I've said, and we have, physical barriers, and that's the right thing to do in those places.
Both candidates have cited their records as a reason voters should choose them. Cruz has been in elected office longer than Allred and has been a vocal supporter of term limits. January 2023 was just one instance when he introduced a constitutional amendment limiting senators to 2 terms. He's running for his 3rd.
What would you say to voters who agree with your amendment and would like to see you step aside as a result and not run?
Well, listen, I am a strong, passionate believer in term limits. There's a world of difference between supporting a reform that would apply across the board versus unilaterally term limiting myself when nobody else is following it. I've never said that I would do that.
If reelected, Cruz says he wants to create jobs in various energy sectors.
My view on energy is all of the above. I believe in every energy source, oil and gas and wind and solar and nuclear and everything.
Allred echoes a similar sentiment.
It's an all-of-the-above approach. It has to be. For us, oil and gas is critically important. It's going to remain critically important. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't continue to invest in solar and wind. To me, Texas is an energy state. We always will be. We've led the world. We have to continue to do that.
Two candidates, two different versions of the policies that would best represent Texas. Between them, some similarities. A desire to create jobs in various types of energy is an example. Voters will make their decision on November 5th. Michael Richardson, KLTV 7 News.
To watch our full interviews with Representative Colin Allred and Senator Ted Cruz, log on to our mobile app, look for the story under the news section.